the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what
And
you
we
can
are
do for
back,
your country.
Taylor. How has your week been so far?
Good. I'm trying to find a way to take a picture of these pretty glass bottles so people know what I was talking about last episode.
Yeah, I particularly like the one that looks like crystal.
I know,
You
isn't it
said
pretty?
you got from what is it, Trader Joe's?
Yeah, from Trader Joe's. Yeah, it's just like a white wine, and yeah, it's beautiful.
Little
Okay, done.
DIY home good tips from Taylor.
Another tip that I have
are a
is you can
master.
buy like those, those pour things that like they have at bars on liquor bottles, like the silver things, like that they put on top of them.
Yeah,
You can buy those and put them on the bottle and make it your olive oil bottle.
that's brilliant.
It's really pretty. I have like a really pretty tequila bottle as my olive oil bottle.
I bet if you just started doing DIY projects, I mean, the thing you did to that garage that you turned into Juan's office is incredible.
Mhm.
Like y'all are really
I mean,
good
I
at
didn't do that.
DIY stuff.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
well, let's go ahead, and Taylor had a great story for us. We're getting into like some pretty interesting stuff. I mean, I like to think that it's always interesting, but like, I think you're going to be interested in this topic,
Sweet.
which it's a topic that's constantly around in the U.S. And so I'm going to be discussing the Port Arthur Massacre.
Ooh.
Do you know what that is?
I don't, not right away, but I feel like I will when you start talking about it. Also, can you intro the show?
Oh,
Or maybe we did that yet.
welcome to Do to Fail. This is a twice weekly podcast where me and Taylor cover topics that we just find interesting, and then we banter about it, which some of y'all don't like and some of you do, and then we move on and continue with different topics that we release twice a week. Was that good?
Tell your friends. We're learning a
Tell
lot
your
of
friends.
stuff.
We're learning a lot of stuff. I learned a lot on this one because, well, basically, I'll give you the TLDR right now. So this was the mass shooting event that occurred in Australia that triggered all kinds of gun reforms in Australia.
Ooh, okay, yeah.
And so I was really
Exciting.
curious to learn about what was going on with guns in Australia before, what was going on with guns with Australia after, how did that relate compared to other countries in the United States, so on and so forth. And here's the spoiler alert is I reached no conclusions, except that obviously banning guns results in less gun violence. But there's some other
Who would have guessed?
Who would have thought? Who would have thought? But there's a lot to dig into, and this is one that I really want to hear your perspective on. So like listen closely because I do have a lot of open-ended questions on this one and could use your perspective. So the event we're talking about, it occurred in the Australian state of Tasmania on April 28th, 1996. So we're going back about 28 years at this point to explore this. So I'm going to cover this in several sections. One is what was going on with Australia before this happened. We're going to talk about the perpetrator, the person who actually did it. We're going to talk about the crime itself. And then we're going to talk about Australia after this happened. So those are kind of the four sections that I broke this into. So before Port Arthur happened, each state in Australia was responsible for their own gun laws. So there was no federal gun regulations. It was all dictated and determined by those individual states. The event here, like I said, took place in Tasmania. So I was looking at gun laws there in particular, and it was it was lax. Like it was a pretty lax state when it came to gun laws. That in Queensland, those two seemed to be like the Texas and Arkansas of Australia for the most part. And so at that time there
Funny.
was no thank you. So,
but I get it. I get what you mean.
So at that time, Tasmania actually didn't even require registering of firearms. It was kind of a free for all. You can do whatever you want. So I use the US as a benchmark to kind of understand where the world is and was at that time. So just for comparison's sake, and the US is a good benchmark because everybody knows what our relationship to guns is. And right now, for example, we have a 32% personal gun ownership. Is that the word I'm looking for? Basically, 32% of individuals in the US own guns. And in addition to that, they own more than one gun. So the last stat that I looked at from 2017 said that there was a per capita number of 120 guns per 100 people in the US.
Wow. So some people have a shit ton of guns.
Yeah.
Is what that math
Well,
means.
yeah, because if 30% gun ownership rate, what that equals out to is 68% of the people don't own guns, but you have 120 to 100 guns. So
Right. So
yeah,
someone owns
some
a lot of
people own
guns.
some people have like arsenals at home.
Yeah.
So
My only hope is that I hope I always think of, remember Tremors, that movie?
oh yeah, beautiful, great movie, amazing.
With Reba McEntire, her and her husband have that arsenal. That's the only one I've ever found charming.
Yeah, well, she can pull it off too.
Hmm.
So at the time of this event, Australia had a gun ownership rate of 8.1%. So it wasn't like
Wow.
crazy riddled with guns, but it wasn't like nobody had guns.
Right.
8.1 is still in the global total relatively high.
What's the global total right now?
I don't have a global total. I do have a listing of what it is right now in terms of where Australia and the US and some other countries rank in terms of gun ownership. I think it was Australia's like 51 or something. US is number 1 by a super wide margin. It's not even
Yeah.
close. It's like the per capita is like 100. I forgot what it was exactly. It was like 120 to 100, and then the next country is like 60 to 100. It like drops
Hmm.
dramatically.
Significantly. Yeah, yeah.
Right. But that's kind of the condition of what's going on in Australia before this event happens. Let's get into the perpetrator real quick and then get into the event itself. So the perpetrator, his name is Martin Bryant. And if you look him up, there's some pictures of him where he looks kind of like a surfer guy. And there's one picture of him where he looks particularly crazy that I later found out was all kind of media done. They basically made his eyes glow and he looks absolutely terrifying in it. But
Whoa.
that's the guy. If you look him up, you
Hey,
can
what's
see
his name again? Can you tell me it again?
Martin Bryant.
Okay.
So at the time of the event, he was 29 years old, and I had a hard time kind of coming up with a good description for him. He strikes me, the combo that I hit was that he was as mentally ill as Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook guy, but
Hmm.
also like innately evil, like the Columbine guys. Like I feel like those two are like an interesting cross section of like the worst of
Hmm.
humanity.
Hmm.
He was always odd, like to the point where this was documented extensively way before this event by his parents, by teachers, by social workers, by acquaintances that he grew
Hmm.
up with. He left school at around 16 or 17 years old. And part of the reason was basically just an inability or an unwillingness to learn or engage with school or students or the curriculum. He would be evaluated for mental illness at this time. The reason being is that he essentially, at 16, 17 years old, fell back onto a disability pension. So he was using disability benefits, and they had to do an evaluation of him to decide whether he was fit and suited for this kind of um, benefit. And when they did their psyche eval, they established that he was borderline mentally disabled. So they clocked an IQ score of somewhere around 66, which is
Hmm.
like I think in the US 70 under 75 is considered disabled, but maybe Australia and maybe especially back then they had a different standard, but he was really low. Like I mean 75 is like bad, like he was very very low.
Hmm.
And in addition to everything else, he was also completely illiterate. He didn't know how to read, didn't know how to write. He never learned those skills.
Hmm.
From reading his parents' account, they seemed to recognize pretty quickly there was something going on with him. There was something wrong with him. His parents were decent parents by all accounts. Like they weren't, you know, horrible people. So like there's no assumption there's any sort of abuse in his background, other than the fact that he was mercilessly bullied at school. He was not getting abused at home. That is at
Did he
minimum, he
have
didn't have that going.
did he have any siblings?
I don't know. I didn't
What?
look that up. Yeah. Uh it is pretty clear, assumingly at this point, he never made friends at school, and he was prone to torturing animals. So weird. He'd also mess with people in like very strange, but also kind of passive aggressive ways. One report I read was that he would cut down his neighbor's trees without telling them. You just
That's
go.
so annoying.
Can you imagine doing a chore that annoying for the fun of annoying somebody else? It's just
Oh my God. No.
Later in life, he would be diagnosed with Asperger's and ADD. Earlier, when he was going for a psych eval for his disability benefits, it was assumed he might be schizophrenic or like on the cusp of developing schizophrenia. Later on, after everything that we're going to discuss here happened, and he did a full course of psych evaluations, it was clear that he was not schizophrenic. So that part of mental illness did not hit him.
Okay.
Martin would never make friends with anybody his own age. He did, however, develop a really weird relationship with a wealthy older woman when he was 19 and she was 54. Her name was Helen Mary Elizabeth Harvey, and you're going to hate this, Taylor. She was what was called a tatter sales heir. And I looked this up. So this is a thing in Australia where there was this one company called Tattersale that was started in like the 1800s by this guy who really wanted his employees to have an ownership interest in the business. And so, unlike our situation where we work for companies who give us the option to buy stock, that's not how this works. This is basically employee owned. So when he died, all interest in the business went into this trust that was all divvied up amongst their employees so that when the company goes public, they all get rich. And so there's this group of people who, when this company went public, ended up making a shitload of money. This woman, Helen Mary Elizabeth Harvey, this 54-year-old woman that Martin meets, her great grandfather was some worker at this company in like the 1800s, and she still inherited like a boatload of money.
That's awesome. I do hate that because I'm jealous, but fuck, it's cool.
I know. I hate it in the exact same way.
Yeah.
Helen lived in a rundown mansion with her mother Hilza, and Martin was trying to launch a lawn mowing. Yeah, right. It sounds like, what was that movie? The
Grey Gardens.
Thank you.
Yes.
It sounds just like Grey Gardens.
Yeah.
So Martin was apparently trying to launch a lawn mowing business, so he came knocking on her door. Helen hired Martin, and some sort of friendship developed at this point. It was clear from what I read that they had been living in isolation for about 30 years. So Helen and her mom were just living in this mansion, isolated, not talking to anybody. And the house sounds like an episode of Hoarders. Like, I read that they were sleeping on trash, and like there was a dozen dogs or something in the house. There was like 40 cats in the house. It sounded like an absolute vision from hell. So
it sounds exactly like Grey Gardens. Yeah.
Yeah,
they
exactly.
had like those raccoons in the attic and stuff.
Yeah. So Helen and Martin developed a friendship, which Martin would swear up and down wasn't sexual. And at one point, apparently some anonymous person, God bless them, submitted like a welfare check for this mom and daughter duo. And authorities visited the house, and they're like, you can't live here. Nobody can live here. Like, this is not a living situation. And they also discovered that Helen had been living with an infected ulcer for like presumably at least 2 years, which I don't know what that feels like, but it's got to be horrible. I don't know how you just live your life that way.
Yeah.
And
I think I've been watching a lot of Hoarders, so yes. It sounds exactly like Hoarders.
Have you seen that one woman who shits in the bucket, and she carries the bucket out and splashes it on the ground and it goes all over her feet?
I mean, I'd have also, it's also so many who just shit in plastic bags and leave them piled up in the bathroom.
Yeah, that movie is depressing, or that show's depressing.
I don't know why I watch it so much. I should probably stop. But also, it gets me to throw stuff away. So I'll like pause it and throw like a ton of stuff away.
That's literally the logic I use when I watch my 600-pound life. I'm like, I watch them and I'm like, I'm just gonna not order that pizza now.
I'm gonna have a salad. I'm gonna go for a walk. Yeah.
So at this point, the authorities discover that Helen has this infected ulcer, and that her mom Hilza had a broken hip. She'd been living with a broken hip this whole time, and they weren't doing anything with it.
She probably wasn't even like getting up at all, right?
Probably not.
Yeah.
They found her on a pile of trash. So they were legitimately, it was legitimately on a pile of trash.
I'm sorry to laugh, but you're like, yeah, Taylor. I'm like, okay, I get it.
So they were both taken away for treatment. And somehow Martin is tasked with getting this house in order to be up for code. I'm assuming they just offered him a ton of money or something, or I don't know. By the time the cleanup was complete, Hilza, the mom, had just died in the hospital from her injuries. And so Helen asked Martin to come and stay with her, and he did. As part of the cleanup, the authorities made Helen give up all her animals to the Humane Society because like that's not any way for a human or the animals to live. And they
That also
apparently,
happens a lot on hoarders.
yeah, some of the ones where they find like the cat that went missing like 12 years ago, and it's just like a piece of cardboard.
So many flattened cats.
God, it's
It's
so disgusting.
horrifying.
So disgusting.
Yeah.
But apparently the authorities forbid her from ever keeping animals again. So she did like the only rational thing you would do in that situation when you have a ton of money and no sense. She ended up buying a 72-acre farm for her and Martin to go live on, which they did. So in a little bit of a twist of events for Helen. So in 1992, Helen, Martin, and her two newly acquired dogs were in a car that Helen was driving when it apparently veered into oncoming traffic and resulted in her death as well as the death of the dogs. Prior to this, Helen had recounted to people that sometimes when she's driving, Martin, who will be in the passenger seat, will just reach over and grab the steering wheel and start jerking it.
Hmm.
So apparently, Helen had had 3 accidents before this one that killed her, where Martin literally did this thing. And so it was assumed that this wasn't some accidental death, that he had done this to her.
Could he drive?
We're going to get to that. We're going to
Okay.
get to that. Yeah. Good question. So what ends up happening is that Helen, the only person that was consistent in Helen's life was Martin. And so he ends up inheriting everything from her, including $550,000 in cash. His parents, upon learning this, they're like, hey, he can't manage this money. He's literally mentally handicapped.
Mm-hmm.
And so they decided to give guardianship of Martin and his money over to a trust. So that was a way to kind of the reason I'm bringing that up is because you wonder yourself, how did this guy not just blow through all this money and like, but
Mm-hmm.
like he couldn't blow through the money. He was dispersed money on a regular basis by this trust. So Martin's father ended up moving onto the farm with Martin, and he also inherited the farm from Helen. And about 2 months after he moved in, he was found dead, having drowned in the dam. It's assumed that he killed himself. Something later on they would think, okay, he probably also. I mean, we feel good that he killed Helen, and he probably killed his dad too. But the reason why they think that maybe he didn't was because it was noted that his dad suffered from depression,
Mm-hmm.
and that several months before any of this ended up happening, before Helen dying and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
he'd actually transferred all of his personal assets. Like he removed him, or any personal assets that he had that were not accessible by his wife, Martin's mom, he allowed her to have that access. So there was some assumption that he like was thinking he's going to kill himself anyways. He was
Mm-hmm.
found uh dead in a dam, like having drowned, and had a weight vest over his head. And so
Okay. Well,
weird way to
I mean,
kill
who knows?
yourself, really gruesome to fucking throw yourself into a deep dam and just float to the bottom of the ocean. Like, why would you do it that way? But
But
I
people do
guess it
it
works.
all sorts of different ways for no reason at all. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
fair.
Not no reason
uh
at all, but like, you know what I mean? Like small things that you wouldn't think were the thing they are.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, Martin in this situation ends up inheriting a $250,000 pension from the father as well. And then he decides that he wants to sell the farm and move back to that dumpy original house that he first found Helen in. And so he ends
Hmm.
up selling the farm, and for whatever reason, he ends up netting only $145,000. But one thing that's interesting here that made me think, it was like, at this point, he's about 24 years old. He's a mentally disabled recluse who is known for just walking around shooting dogs while also trying to befriend them. And he now has a net worth of just under $1 million in the
Yeah.
1990s. Like sometimes life just happens, and like,
Yeah. He kind of like fell into all of that.
yeah, I don't want to say he has a charmed life, but like
No.
still.
Yeah.
So at this point, so he moves back into this house. At this point, he's lost Helen, his only friend he's ever had in his life. He loses his dad, and he spent his days mostly just drinking, going to the local restaurant, and he'd also make very frequent plane trips, not because he was like an avid traveler, but because it was the only way to have a captive audience who was forced to listen to him talk, because he would be on the plane and you start talking to the guy next to him, and like you have to listen to him. You're
Oh, that
sitting
sounds
there.
terrible. What a nightmare.
Yeah, and there's no, AirPods, so you gotta actually focus on what he's saying.
Remember in Airplane when this is terrible and an outdated joke, but when the person's talking and then the person ends up hanging themselves on the plane because they don't want to talk to them anymore.
I mean, I know that movie is not acceptable anymore, but it was a good movie.
God.
But so obviously, all this isolation, the loneliness, the drinking, the lack of social skills, they all made him very, very depressed. And he started having ideations that he would vocalize some people around hurting people for not liking him. Again, this was a guy who would shoot at dogs while he was
Hmm.
trying to make friends with them. Like he's clearly
He doesn't
not.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So, oh yeah, I forgot to mention this part. When he was on the farm with Helen, there was apparently like a apple stand there, and they would like sell apples through it. And he would
Hmm.
also walk around shooting his airsoft guns at customers while hiding in the bushes. He would have been 25 years old
Yeah.
this time. So
Yeah.
that's our perpetrator or antagonist, whatever you want to call him. The event itself, chronologically, what happened, like these stories are all kind of the same. It's like, where did you go and then what did you do? I feel like the
Hmm.
Cotton Eye Joe thing, but it's all the same as everything else, right? They go somewhere, they start blasting. This is gonna read pretty easy, but chronologically,
Hmm.
what ended up happening was apparently Martin was infatuated with this one piece of property in bed and breakfast. Almost called it an Airbnb. It's a bed and breakfast in Tasmania called Seascape. I looked it up. I mapped it. It is right on the water. It is gorgeous. It is lush. It is green. It is beautiful.
Hmm.
And he apparently wanted to buy this piece of property, which the owners, David and Nolene Martin, did not want to sell to him. So what ends up happening on April 28th, 1996, is Martin goes to this part of Tasmania where Seascape is, and he murders the couple who own the bed and
Jesus.
breakfast. We don't know exactly, but he murdered them. So the actual events happened around noon-ish on April 28th. He killed them somewhere in a 12-hour window before then. So we don't know
Okay.
exactly when, but it was somewhere around a 12-hour window before then. So presumably he was at the house, stayed at the house, he killed them, he stayed there for a while with their bodies before he ends up leaving. What he ends up leaving with is he's in his car, he's got a yellow Volvo, and he takes the keys to Seascape with him, along with the weapons that this couple owned.
So
So
they did own guns.
they owned guns.
Okay.
So he hops in his car and he ends up driving up a little bit to. If you look at this part of Tasmania, it's like a sea resort type
I'm
of
always just
vibe.
surprised that the word Tasmania is real because it just like sounds so silly.
That's where the
But I'll
devils
look at.
come from.
No, I get it, but like whenever I hear it, I'm like, that can't be real. But it
It's
like,
very
and it
cute.
is. Yeah.
So it is. So he ends up driving a short trip over to this place called Broad Arrow Cafe, and he took the rifle with him. And it's just like every other shooting. He walks in, he sits down. Apparently, nobody cares or notices this rifle. He sees this couple visiting from Malaysia on his right. They're called Mo Yi Ing and Su Leng Chung, and he just starts shooting them. Shoots them both, kills them both. He then shoots and wounds this other guy and then kills his 21-year-old girlfriend. It sounds like even by this point we're up to like 4 shots being taken. Nobody really knows what's going on. It made me think of like this wasn't this is not a common thing. And when you hear the gunshots, it's easy to just not know that they're gunshots or to not understand what's happening,
100%.
So
And even here, I feel like that would happen. You'd be like,
yeah.
this can't be real, you know? Like remember we heard gunshots when we were in North Carolina?
Yeah, I mean, I hear gunshots here. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not that unusual of a thing. But
Hmm.
but also this is a Sunday. This is a Sunday early afternoon. It is a beautiful day, a spring day. Most
Hmm.
people who are here are visiting. Like I said, that one couple was visiting from Malaysia. They all took a ferry in to town so they can be at this one cafe, be in this one part of Tasmania to take in the ocean sights and in the lush green rolling hills. So you look at that environment, you don't assume that there's murders happening around you.
Right. It's yeah, like I feel like your brain isn't meant for that, you know? And like
Can't
even
process.
I was telling someone not in America about how like the kids have drills for an active shooter where they like go into this little like corner of their classroom and like hide behind desks, and it's just like, how's that real?
I mean,
That's
I had that thought last week, Taylor, because I went to a comedy show in town, and yeah, they swipe you and everything, but I was like, I
hmm
mean, people are things happen, right? Like now when I'm in a crowd, I think about this stuff, and I don't
Yeah.
think that wasn't our reality when we were kids. So he is where he ends up standing when he's basically just standing shooting openly into the cafe is at the entrance slash exit. So people are understanding what's happening, they're ducking for cover. What
hmm
we know is that in 15 seconds he killed 12 people and injured 10 others. 15 seconds standing at
Jesus
this entrance.
Christ.
At the other end of the entrance of the cafe is the cafe's gift shop, because again, tourist spot. And he starts walking back that way, firing on people who are hiding under their uh, tables and making his way into the back end where the gift shop is, and he
Ugh.
kills another 8 people there. He then moves to the parking lot where he kills 4 more people. Again, tourist spot. Most of these people were exiting off of buses. They were like tour buses. And so they were trapped. Like they were basically just like they have nowhere to go. And he just walks onto a bus, and most people are off, but somebody's still on, and he just shoots them.
Oh my God.
He then got in his car and he drove up to the toll booth area where he encountered a woman who was fleeing with her 3 and 6-year-old daughters, and
No.
she slowed down because she thought that there was someone there to help. And then
Ugh,
he opens the door, tells her to get on the ground, and she does, and she shoots her in the head.
no.
I know. And he also kills the daughters.
This is terrible. I hate this.
He then came upon a BMW that was blocking the exit, and it had 4 people in it, and driver and 3 passengers, and he killed all of them. And then he took all the weapons out of his car and put them in the BMW and then drove off with it. He was driving back to the seascape when he came across a Toyota and just cut directly in front of it. And in it was this guy named Glenn Piers along with his girlfriend named Zoe Hall. Martin apparently got out with his rifle, and he reached into the car and grabbed Zoe's head and tried to rip her out of the car. He was trying to kidnap her essentially.
Oh my
And
God.
then Glenn decides he's gonna try and protect her. He gets up and Martin points the gun at him and says, "Get in the back of the BMW." So he opens the back of the BMW, the trunk, and gets Glenn to go inside there. In the middle of all this, Zoe is trying to climb over into the driver's seat to try and get away, and Martin just shoots her and kills her.
Ugh,
So he was just
this
looking for a
is,
hostage.
I'm so glad that I know we're talking about potentially doing video for our our show, but like if we do it, like I need to work on my face because my face is just a horrid face right now.
Yeah, yeah.
This is, I mean, this is terrible.
It's very grotesque. Um,
hmm
Police obviously found him very quickly, given the fact that he was at Seascape shooting at cars that were just driving by. Like again, it's this weird mix of evil mixed with severe mental illness. Like I don't even know what this actually is. He was really just taking pot shots at people while they were like driving by, and so police figured out it was where he was pretty quickly. What ends up happening is that he goes inside the house with Glenn. He takes Glenn out of the trunk of the BMW. He handcuffs Glenn to the staircase, and then he kind of just goes upstairs and disappears and is doing his own thing for God knows
In
how
the
long.
in the weird hoarder house still?
No, no, he's at the seascape. He's at the
Okay.
place of the first
Oh, right, right,
murders.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
During this time, apparently, police were like, hey, we don't know how to take care of this. And so we're going to reach out to Melbourne, which is the closest big city in Australia, and get their SWAT team to come over and help us figure this out. Apparently, 18 hours had passed while they were trying to negotiate with them. They'd called his cell phone, and they were, or not a cell phone, they called the phone to the Seascape, and we're talking to him through there, and he wasn't giving himself up. Some way, somehow, in the middle of waiting for the SWAT team to show up, Martin sets fire to the house and he comes out like covered in flames and he like tries to make an escape, which is an odd thing to
What?
do when you've done this. Apparently, he set the fire to like confuse police and then maybe make an escape. So you're gonna be seen. I don't know how you think you're not gonna get caught on this, but
Oh
that
my
was the game
God.
plan. So
And he's on fire.
he's
He's on
on
fire?
fire. Yeah, he was on fire. His clothes were on fire.
This
So
story is wild. I'm gonna throw up.
he runs out. Police put him out. They send him over to a hospital to get treatment. They put the fire out. They go inside. They find Glenn was always handcuffed. He was never released from his handcuffs, but he did have a bullet hole in his head. So
Oh.
he shot and killed him too.
Oh.
Ultimately, Martin would plead guilty and receive 35 life sentences plus 1,652 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He's, I think, 57, 58, somewhere around there right now. He was initially, for a very long time, I think it was somewhere around 8 years, 7 years, kept in complete isolation. He was kept in complete confinement because everybody wanted to kill him. Everybody wanted to kill him.
Yeah.
And eventually he made it into a slightly more lax environment where he was living in the mental ward and he was immediately attacked. And he's kind of been in that situation ever since. He's in a maximum security jail now. He left the mental ward and he's been trying to commit suicide for the past 15 years, give or take,
Mm-hmm.
and hasn't succeeded yet. So that's what his current condition is. And you look at pictures of him, you can tell that he is not doing good in there. So
Good.
I wanted to talk on what happened after this occurred. So what happened was Australia responded really, really swiftly. They had attempted to nationally regulate. I mean, the same way here we do in the US. They tried to nationally regulate firearms
Mm-hmm.
before. And again, Tasmania and Queensland were the holdouts saying, the same stuff you would hear: government overreach, freedom of rights, all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once this event happened, the public demand overrode any of that stuff, and the prime minister at the time was able to pass a law called the National Firearms Agreement, which
Mm-hmm.
mandated licensing in all states of firearms, as well as outlawing completely certain types of firearms. So things like semi-automatic guns, rifles, shotguns, all those were completely banned and outlawed. In addition to that, they spent somewhere around $340 million on a gun buyback program where they were able to
Mm-hmm.
buy 640,000 weapons and bring them off the street entirely. So this is where I got a little bit in the weeds on what is the before and after progress. So it has been 28 years now since Port Arthur, since this shooting happened. From that date onward, there have been 24 mass shootings in Australia with 58 deaths and 71 injuries. In the preceding 28 years before Port Arthur, there was 172 deaths and 115 injuries from mass shootings in
So
Australia.
they halved it.
They have that. So it doesn't
Yeah.
solve the problem, it
Mm-hmm.
mitigates it.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing. As of right now, Australia has 3 million registered firearms, and rough approximations put it at 260,000 unregistered guns.
Right.
So, like I said at the beginning of this, right now Australia's per capita rate of gun ownership is their 51st in the world, which equates to about 14 guns per 100 people. So, I think that we have this perception that Australia just banned guns. They didn't.
Right. They
They're still
didn't. They're
guns. Like
not zero.
they're not zero.
Right.
So, the reason I raise this comparison is because of one argument that anti-gun control advocates make, which if you ban guns, then the only people with guns are criminals.
Right.
So that's the part where I really want to like get your spin, and not your spin, but your perspective on it. So I pulled some numbers
Mm-hmm.
here. So in 2022, Australia had 218 homicides, including one mass shooting. So that's 2022.
That's it, honestly.
218.
That's like Chicago in June.
Guess how many Mexico had that year?
Oh, 100,000.
32,223 homicides.
Okay.
And Mexico has a lower per capita gun ownership rate than Australia does.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you account for the fact that Australia is 6x smaller in population than Mexico is, it would,
Mm-hmm.
if you were to multiply that by six, their homicide rate, it would still be 4% of what Mexico's murder rate actually is. And
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that's worth noting is, to your earlier question, Martin couldn't drive. He didn't have a license to drive a car.
But he was doing it anyway.
He also had no license to own a firearm.
Right. But
He had it
he did
anyways.
this. Yeah.
And so that's kind of like where I don't have a conclusion for this other than banning guns, I think, or not, sorry, not banning guns, because again, that's not what Australia did.
Right.
Regulating them more heavily,
Mm-hmm.
I think would have the outcome of less accidental deaths via firearms. Like the story
Yeah.
that you hear the most that is not really not talked about or reported very much is a lot of the deaths that happen in the US from firearms, kids find their dad's gun and shoot their buddy in the face.
I feel like that's reported on a lot. Gun violence is the number one cause of death for children in America.
Yeah.
And that includes that like accidental picking up a gun, dad's cleaning his gun in the living room, blah 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 blah. Like it's that's very, very real and very, very scary.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, but it's pretty compelling. I was shocked to learn that Australia had so many mass shootings since this happened. Because again, we
Yeah.
were told that they don't have guns, and it's like, well, dude, they've had 24 mass shootings. They almost had one mass shooting a year every year since this happened in a country of 26 million people. Like,
Yeah. So it's not zero. But I think I mean I've seen like the videos of them like melting down like the AR-15s or whatever, like the semi-automatic rifles. And like I think like the buzzword, right, is common sense gun law, gun reform. Like the woman who just shot, I don't think she killed anybody, but she shot in Joel Osteen's mega church in
yeah.
Texas. Do you remember this? She bought an AR-15 and she had been previously hospitalized for mental illness. And her family was like trying to get her put back into a hospital because they were worried about her. And all that was happening and she was able to purchase an AR-15,
See,
you know?
those are the arguments that I will never understand from the pro gun people of like, there's some, here's the thing, here's a situation that I've thought of before in the past of like when somebody isn't all there
Hmm.
and they're in a dark place and they're in a depressive state and they also happen to be a gun owner, and you're like, there is no situation where this person having a gun is going to make their life or anybody's life better.
Yeah.
There should be a very, very quick, swift, immediate response to, look, we have to take this thing away for now. We will give
Hmm.
it back to you after whatever happens, right? I don't in some states have that, right? They're called red flag laws, where you
Hmm.
can throw up a red flag and say, hey, this person's not,
Acting weird.
it's not every state. It's not
Right.
federal. It's a state by state thing. And it requires you to go to the one source that you never want to put somebody that you might care about in, which is calling the cops.
Yes.
You think to yourself, like, I don't want to be responsible for this person having a record. I don't want them to be responsible for having to sit in like for a minute in like the back of a cop car or with handcuffs on or
Or like the
whatever.
cops getting trigger happy and killing them.
Yeah. Yeah, because
That's like a real
that's a
scare,
real
I think, as
thing.
well. Yeah.
Especially if like they're already unstable, and
Hmm.
so
Well, I think that also ties back to mental health. It ties back to having a community of people around you. Like Abraham Lincoln, his friends took away his knives because he was so depressed.
yeah.
And like they were like, dude, you're gonna hurt yourself, so we're gonna take this away from you and we'll give them back to you when you feel better. Like your friends you should have a community that can do things like that for you. If you want to have like, you know, a bunch of guns for whatever reason, like they should be kept somewhere unbelievably safe. Like you should have to take classes. Like you have to take classes to drive a car. You should have to take classes to buy a gun.
I think that the freewheeling willingness of how, or just like the way we talk about guns in the US, like it's our right, it's this, that's a, it has the ability to remove the gravitas of what the device actually is
Hmm.
and makes you treat it differently than you probably should.
Yeah.
And yeah, this isn't like if you want to own a gun, own a gun. I mean, I've literally thought 50 times, Taylor, while living here, I need to get a gun because like everybody has a gun. Like I should
Yeah,
probably get a
if
gun
necessary.
because everybody has a gun. If
Yeah.
somebody wants
Well,
to
then
break
that
into my house in the middle of the night, and God willing, if my dog doesn't kill them immediately, then if they have a gun, they can have whatever they want, right?
Luna
So
is not going to kill someone immediately when they get into your house. So
then I'm gonna get then I'm
yeah,
need to get a
I'm going to
gun.
say that is a bad plan A because that's not going to happen.
Then I need to get a gun.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's the story again. Like I don't there's no
Yeah.
answers, there's no solutions, none of that, but it's more of like just hey, like here's this horrible thing that happened. It is horrible. When you read about it, it's really grotesque. When you hear about this guy's life
Hmm.
and you like try to put yourself in that psychology of how can someone possibly do this, then you realize that this happens in the US like every other week is terrifying. It's
It's
just like
terrifying.
absolutely
And
terrifying.
I mean, I think like the argument for that only bad guys will have guns is like, that's still less guns, like and like you said in the very beginning, the more you have, the more problems that more people have, people get killed. I remember, I think it was Colbert was talking to a congressman or something like years ago, and they got down to it, and the congressman was like, yeah, like if there's more pools, more people will drown. And Colbert was like, exactly. Like,
I remember that bit. That was a
yeah,
good
he's
bit.
like, literally exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. If there's more guns, more people are going to get shot. And then like the whole Constitution thing, the well-regulated militia. Yeah, of course you needed a gun in 1770 fucking six because the British were attacking, and also you were trying to move west, and there were bears. Like, sure, you need a gun to eat. You
I
know?
I threw out a stat earlier, and I just want to confirm because I didn't actually give the numbers. I mentioned that on a per capita basis for legal firearms, Australia has more than Mexico,
Hmm.
and just confirming it was 51 on the list with 14.5 for Australia. It's 60 for Mexico at 12.9 per 100 capita.
So I'm wondering if that's because of like, well, the economic uncertainty in Australia versus Mexico. If things are like better for your people, I feel like that also makes things safer.
Mexico's not better.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I feel like that's why Mexico would have more gun violence than Australia.
Well, no, yes, for sure, yes, that. But the reason I'm bringing it up is because the number of legal firearms is not the problem in this dynamic,
Right.
right?
That's what I'm saying.
It's
So like what is the problem?
unregistered firearms that is a result of an economy that is forcing people into the black market and the black market trades to support themselves. So it is
Yes.
you are correct. You are correct. But
Yeah.
it's just like it's just, I'm just pointing out that the registration piece of it and the licensing piece of it and the volume of it isn't
Hmm.
it doesn't answer every question essentially.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I think it's so scary because it is another thing. It's like obviously like these mass shootings are a smaller scale than like a nuclear war, but I think similarly, like the thread between our two stories this week is like it's indiscriminate. You can't control your fate when it's in someone else's hands.
Totally.
You know? Yeah.
Totally. And the fact that we have to like legitimately think when we go into a crowd, like
Where's the exit?
something can happen.
Yeah, totally. I have like a
So,
plan to like get my kids the fuck out of Walmart as fast as possible. I know where all the exits are, if something
oh,
happens,
good.
to
Yeah, you
like
should.
get us out as fast as we can. Like stuff like that. And that's a real threat and very, very scary.
So, some uplifting stories for you all this week. I hope you enjoyed them.
I'm never going to sleep well again.
Yeah, you and me both.
Cool.
But any final thoughts, Taylor?
I did, I just remembered to tell you that I did get my membership card to the Satanic Temple, and I got this cool candle because I wanted to give money to the Satanic Temple because of the stuff that, look at this cool candle with a skeleton on it.
That is very cool. How much did you give them?
Um, I don't know. I think, well, there's a lot of fun things where you give them like $6.66 a month. They'll like put it towards X, Y, and Z. But they're doing some really cool things in states like Iowa or Oklahoma and Utah where there's legislation on the table to put like unregistered clergy people in schools as counselors. Like, they don't have to do background checks. They just like are in there to be counselors. And so the Satanic Temple will go and be like, We can't wait. We'd love to send some of our satanic ministers into these schools, and then those bills are not passing, because those bills are very dangerous. I can't imagine sending someone with no background check into a school.
That's one of the things I love about the Church of Satan is like they
It's the
are
Satanic Temple. The Church of Satan is the not great. Satanic Temple is the one we want.
really.
Yeah, Church of Satan is one like Anton LaVey. They actually believe in Satan. The Satanic Temple does not believe in Satan.
What
They believe
the
in
the one that like goes around like basically roasting politics and like
that's the Satanic
putting
Temple.
got it.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I love that work. I love putting a statue of the devil in a courthouse.
They're yeah, their attempts and their humor is unwavering.
It's so
And that
great.
candle is very cool. I'm
Is it
disappointed
cool?
it's not red, but it's very cool.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, that's fair. That's fair. But yeah, it's cool. So I was excited to give them some of my money to do keep up the good work because I hate that shit. Keep
Yeah, I
your
don't blame
want to
you.
go to religious school, go to religious school. Don't put it in my schools.
Yeah, especially with no
Fuck out
background
of
check.
here.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah, like it's always a youth pastor, BT Dubs, who
I
is the
know.
criminal. So be on the lookout. Yes, I did that.
Um,
That was exciting.
sweet. Well, anything else to say before we sign off?
Nope, please send us emails, doomtofailpod@gmail.com. Um We are on socials at Doom to Fail Pod. I'm putting some of our like short videos on YouTube, trying to get some attention there. So I'm doing that. And then sometime this week, we should probably have doomtofailpod.com available. I'll definitely alert everybody when we do, but I made it. I just can't get it to link to the domain, which is a tale as old as time, an age-old
Right.
problem. I'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks, Taylor, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll join you all
Thanks
again
for the
next week.
nightmares. Yeah, cool.
No
Talk
worries.
to you later.
Bye all.
Bye.